باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، اور میں اپنے آنسوؤں سے بجھا لوں گی اپنی پیاس، میں اپنے آنسوؤں سے بجھا لوں گی اپنی پیاس، دریا سے لوٹ آؤ چچا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، وہ سر رکھ دیا سکینہ نے زینب کی گود میں، سر رکھ دیا سکینہ نے زینب کی گود میں، رکھنا پھوپھی خیال میرا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، اور مقتل سے سوئے شام یہ کہتی ہوئی چلی، مقتل سے سوئے شام یہ کہتی ہوئی چلی، بابا میرا شہید ہوا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، مقتل سے آ رہی ہے صدا میں یتیم ہوں، باد حسین کس نے کہا میں یتیم ہوں، صلوات دیجیے۔
آواز بلند صلوات. غم حسین میں اشک ازا بہا. اس کو ہٹاؤ, دوسرا والا مائک لگاؤ, یہ بالکل بیکار ہے. نہیں اس میں جا رہے آپ کو سننے نہیں دے رہا. بابا ہاں اب صحیح ہے یہ. کیا کرنا, معاف کیجیے گا. غم حسین میں اشک ازا بہاتے ہیں. غم حسین میں اشک ازا بہاتے ہیں. یہ بخششوں کے دیے ہیں جو ہم جلاتے ہیں. یہ بخششوں کے دیے ہیں جو ہم جلاتے ہیں. سدا وہ رہتے ہیں عباس کی ضمانت میں, جو لوگ اپنے گھروں پر علم لگاتے ہیں. سدا وہ رہتے ہیں عباس کی ضمانت میں, جو لوگ اپنے گھروں پر علم لگاتے ہیں. غم حسین میں گر معرفت حیدر ثانی ہو جا, گر معرفت حیدر ثانی کچھ اور ہی انداز جوانی ہو جا, کچھ اور ہی انداز جوانی عباس علی کہہ کے اٹھائے جو قدم, ہو آگ کا دریا بھی تو پانی ہو جا. عباس علی کہہ کے اٹھائے جو قدم, ہو آگ کا دریا بھی تو پانی ہو جا گر معرفت ہے درے بابا سے بلند صلوات فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے حشر کے دن یہی بخشش کے سہارے ہوں گے فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے قبر میں چین سے سوئیں گے عزادار حسین قبر میں چین سے سوئیں گے عزادار آنکھ کھولیں گے تو کوثر کے کنارے ہوں گے فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے قافلہ خلد کی جانب جو بڑھے گا اپنا قافلہ خلد کی جانب جو بڑھے گا اپنا راہبر حضرت عباس ہمارے ہوں گے راہبر حضرت عباس ہمارے ہوں گے فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے اہل ماتم کو بھلا روک سکے گا کوئی اہل ماتم کو بھلا روک سکے گا کوئی باب جنت پہ جو زہرا کے دلارے ہوں گے فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے اس کو ایک ماہی سمجھ سکتی ہے باد اکبر کیسے دن عزیز کے لیلا نے گزارے ہوں گے فرد اعمال نے
بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے. دل کا کیا حال ہوا ہوگا علی اکبر جا لے کے مرنے کی رضا رن کو سدھارے ہوں گے. فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے. رو لو آج ہاتھوں سے سر پیٹ کے اصغر کو ربا کل کو رسی میں بندھے ہاتھ تمہارے ہوں گے. فرد اعمال میں بس اشک ہمارے ہوں گے. حشر کے دن یہی فاتحہ. یہ مرثیہ میرا بھی بہت پسندیدہ ہے اور وحید بھائی سے گفتگو ہو رہی تھی تو انہوں نے فرمائش کیا کہ آپ یہ والا پڑھیں. ایک آواز بلند سلوات. پرچے ہو رہے ہیں تمہیں چاہیے. قید خانے میں تلا تم ہے کہ ہند آتی ہے دختر فاطمہ غیرت سے موئی جاتی ہے. روح قالب میں وہ زندان سے گھبراتی ہے. بے حواسی سے ہر ایک بار وہ چلاتی ہے. بے حواسی سے ہر ایک بار وہ چلاتی ہے. آسمان دور زمین سخت کدھر جاؤں بیبیوں مل کے دعا مانگو کہ مر جاؤں. بیبیوں مل کے دعا مانگو کہ مر جاؤں. بیبیوں مل کے دعا مانگو کہ مر جاؤں. لونڈیاں تھیں زنیں حاکم کے جلوم تاباں دیکھتی کیا ہے کہ ایک شیر ہے آہن میں لاغر و خستہ تن و فاقہ کشو تشنت منہ پہ سیلی کے نشہ پوش پہ دروں کے نشہ ساق بافاقوں سے زنجیر میں تراتی ہے. استخوانوں سے لرزنے کی صدا آتی ہے. استخوانوں سے لرزنے کی صدا آتی ہے. ہند نے پوچھا مرض کیا ہے کہا بے پد رو کے وہ بولی دوا کیا ہے کہا درد سری. گھر جو دریافت کیا کہنے لگے در بدری. بولی لیتا ہے خبر کون کہا بے خبری. بولی لیتا ہے خبر کو کہا بے خبری آہ کرنے کا سبب پوچھا تو شرمانے لگے تازیانوں کے نشہ پشت پہ دکھلانے لگے تازیانوں کے نشہ پشت پہ دکھلانے شان زینب پا نظر کر کے کہا یادا خود سے فاطمہ زندان میں آئی کیوں دیکھا بانو کو تو کہنے لگی ہو کر ہائے ایران کی شہزادی ہوئی ننگے ہائے ایران کی شہزادی ہوئی ننگے قدرت خالق قیوم نظر آتی ہے کوئی زینب کوئی کلثوم نظر آتی ہے کوئی زینب کوئی کلثوم نظر آتی ہے بولی زینب کے نہ لے زینب و کلثوم کا نہ وہ نبی زادیاں ہیں قید میں ان کا کیا ہے غضب فاطمہ کے لال کے حق میں یہ توبہ کر ہوش میں آ بی بی زباں اپنی توبہ کر ہوش میں آ بی بی زباں اپنی بلوے میں عطرت محبوب الہی اور جہاں میں نہ قیامت نہ تباہی اور جہاں میں نہ قیامت نہ تباہی آئے اور جہاں میں نہ قیامت نہ تباہی آئے ظلم گزرے ہیں جو آگے وہ ہیں ایک ایک کو یا کربلا میں کوئی گھر تازہ ہوا ہے بر لائی ہے مالو اساسا سپہ ابن یا الہی رہے سرکار حسینی آباد یا الہی رہے سرکار حسینی کل مجھے لوٹ کا اسباب جو دکھلایا ایک پھٹے جامے پہ حاکم کو بھی غش آیا ایک پھٹے جامے پہ حاکم کو بھی غش آیا ایک انگوٹھی اسی اسباب میں نکلی لال تاؤس کا نگی خون سے مالک کے میں نے جھک جھک کے جو کی اس کے نگینے پہ نگاہ دیکھتی کیا ہوں کہ مرقوم ہے ماشاء اللہ دیکھتی کیا ہوں کہ مرقوم ہے ماشاء اللہ جب اسے سونگتی ہوں جان نکل جاتی ہے صاف خوشبو حسین ابن علی آتی ہے صاف خوشبو حسین ابن علی آتی ہے ہند ایک ایک کے قدموں پا گری گھبرا کر اور دہائی دی کہ اب چپ نہ رہو شرما کر ذبح کر ڈالو مجھے ایک چھری منگوا کر کس مصیبت میں پڑی آہ محل سے آ کر کس مصیبت میں پڑی محل سے ذکر شبیر کا کرتی ہوں تو رو دیتی ہوں، نام جب پوچھتی ہوں سر کو جھکا لیتی ہوں، نام جب پوچھتی ہوں سر کو جھکا لیتی ہوں۔ کہا زینب نے نہ اس بات پہ ہو دامن، نام وارث کا ہمارے بھی ہے بے کش، مال و اسباب ہمارا ہے لٹا بے تقسیم۔ پیٹ کر اس نے کہا میرے لگا دل پر، پیٹ کر اس نے کہا میرے لگا دل پر، یہ گزارش میری زہرا کے لیے مانو، اس انگوٹھی کو میں منگواتی ہوں پہچانو، اس انگوٹھی کو میں منگواتی ہوں پہچانو تو، کہہ کے یہ خاتمے شاہ شہداء منگوا، ایک لونڈی گئی دوڑی ہوئی اور لے آئی، ہند سب رانڈوں کے آگے وہ انگوٹھی لائی، بیر تعظیم اٹھی شیر خدا کی جائی، بیر تعظیم اٹھی شیر خدا کی جائی، گل ہوا شاہ شہیدہ کی نشانی ہے یہ، لوگو زہرا کے سلیمان کی نشانی ہے یہ، لوگو زہرا کے سلیمان کی نشانی ہے یہ، قید خانے میں۔
ہیں کہ تجھ میں پیوستہ پیمبر کا ہر ایک ایثار ہے، تجھ میں پیوستہ پیمبر کا ہر ایک ایثار ہے، اور ہر رگے حق میں رواں تیرے لہو کی دھار ہے، اے حسین ابن علی تیرے کٹے سر کی قسم، تیری بنیادوں پہ قائم دین کی دیوار ہے، اے حسین ابن علی تیرے کٹے سر کی قدم، تیری بنیادوں پہ قائم دین کی دیوار ہے۔ اور چار مصرع اور ہیں کہ عبد و معبود میں واسطہ کر دیا، عبد و معبود میں واسطہ کر دیا، عشق خالق سے دل آشنا کر دیا، دے کے خون راہ حق میں کٹا کر کے سر، تو نے حق زندگی کا ادا کر دیا، دے کے خون راہ حق میں کٹا کر کے سر، تو نے حق زندگی کا ادا کر دیا۔ سلام کے چند ہیں کہ اب کہاں جائیں در حیدر پہ آ جانے کے بعد، اب کہاں جائیں در حیدر پہ آ جانے کے بعد، جام کوثر ہے غدیر خم کے مے خانے کے بعد، جام کوثر ہے غدیر خم کے مے خانے کے بعد، اور عشق حیدر میں بتایا میثم تمار نے، عشق حیدر میں بتایا میثم تمار نے، مدح کرتی ہے زباں گردن کے کٹ جانے کے بعد، مدح کرتی ہے زباں گردن کے کٹ جانے کے بعد، اور آل کی ہر سانس ہے تفسیر میں قرآن کی، آل کی ہر سانس ہے تفسیر میں قرآن کی، آیتیں آنے سے پہلے آیتیں آنے کے بعد، آیتیں آنے سے پہلے، آیتیں آنے کے بعد، اور روب غازی سے صدا لرزے میں تھی افواج شام، روب غازی سے صدا لرزے میں تھی افواج شام، شان کٹ جانے سے پہلے، شان کٹ جانے کے بعد، شان کٹ جانے سے پہلے، شان کٹ جانے کے بعد، اور ذکر ہو اہل وفا کا یا وفا کی بات ہو، ذکر ہو اہل وفا کا یا وفا کی بات ہو، تذکرہ پھیکا رہے گا تیرے افسانے کے بعد، تذکرہ پھیکا رہے گا تیرے افسانے کے بعد، اور لٹ گیا زہرا کا سارا باغ ایک دن میں مگر، لٹ گیا زہرا کا سارا باغ ایک دن میں مگر، کھل اٹھا پھر گلشن اسلام مرجھانے کے بعد، کھل اٹھا پھر گلشن اسلام مرجھانے کے بعد، اب باب رحمت دیکھیے اور حر کی قسمت دیکھیے، باب رحمت دیکھیے اور حر کی قسمت دیکھیے، سیدھا جنت گیا، سیدھا جنت میں گیا دوزخ تک آ جانے کے بعد، باب رحمت دیکھیے اور حر کی قسمت دیکھیے، سیدھا جنت میں گیا دوزخ تک آ جانے کے بعد، ماں کی ممتا کہہ رہی تھی صبر زینب سے یہی، ماں کی ممتا کہہ رہی تھی صبر زینب سے یہی، رو لیں اب بچوں کو بھی خالق کے شکرانے کے بعد، صابرہ ماں تھی مدینے آ کے پر روئی بہت، صابرہ ماں تھی مدینے آ کے پر روئی بہت، دیکھ کر کے خالی بستر اپنے گھر آنے کے بعد، دیکھ کر کے خالی بستر اپنے گھر آنے کے بعد، اور ساری دنیا رو رہی تھی از زمیں تابہ فلک، ساری دنیا رو رہی تھی از زمیں تابہ فلک، اور اصغر ہنس رہے تھے تیر لگ جانے کے بعد، اور اصغر ہنس رہے تھے تیر لگ جانے کے بعد، اور کوششیں یوں تو یزیدیوں نے کی پیہم مگر، کوششیں یوں تو یزیدیوں نے کی پیہم مگر، شہ کا غم بڑھتا رہا صدیاں گزر جانے کے بعد، کوششیں یوں تو یزیدیوں نے کی پیہم مگر، شہ کا غم بڑھتا رہا صدیاں گزر جانے کے بعد، اور مقتدر مولانا فرمائے کہ گر ملے توفیق کر لو نیکیاں منظور کچھ، گر ملے توفیق کر لو نیکیاں منظور کچھ، بے بسی ہوگی لحد میں پیر پھیلانے کے بعد، گر ملے توفیق کر لو نیکیاں منظور کچھ، بے بسی ہوگی لحد میں پیر پھیلانے کے بعد۔ السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ۔
Salawat. There is a request for a Surah Fatiha for the sponsors of tonight's program, Mr. and Mrs. Muhammad Muntazir and Mr. and Mrs. Afzal Haider. They are the sponsors of tonight's program. Please recite a Surah Fatiha for the marhumeen of their family. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Qul huwallahu ahad. Wa lam yakul lahu. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Qul huwallahu ahad. Allah Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And yesterday there are many people who are in need of our du'as, who are sick, who are in calamities, especially our Mu'min brothers in Pakistan who are going through such a difficult time. Please recite 5 times Amma Yujib for their health and for their welfare, and may Allah relieve them of their difficulties. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma Yujibul Mustarra iza da'a wa yakshifu as-su'. 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 Amma Yujibul Mustarra iza da'a ويكشف السوء ويجعلكم خلفاء الأرض إلها مع الله قليلا ما تذكرون. صلوات. صلى الله محمد وآل محمد. We'll continue our programs inshallah tomorrow also at the same time after Maghrib. Sheikh Fayyaz Jafar will be with us tomorrow. Next weekend the schedule in your announcement is for Maulana Afsar Naqvi. But I just heard today that his mother has taken ill, so he'll be cutting short his visit to US and he is returning to Pakistan. So we'll have a change in the Zakir of next weekend. We'll let you know. And the weekend after that, will be Muslim Mahdi, Sheikh Muslim Mahdi for Arba'in, 5 majalis. Those majalis will be in English and Urdu. So those of our brothers who are non-Urdu speaking, I want to let them know that those Arba'in majalis will have an English section in those 5 majalis, inshallah. With a loud salawat, let's welcome Sheikh Fayyaz Jafar to the member. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And you can come a little bit closer to the member, brothers, please. Just come a little closer to the member. Yes. And do not forget about the donations and the contributions I had asked yesterday. Remind you once again for victims of Pakistan flood, as well as for this particular idara, please. And also IMI's Tilmiz Pavilion. Please make sure you make your donations. Salawat.
Before we begin, if I could ask you all to recite one more Surah Al-Fatiha for the marhumin of tonight's sponsors, as well as all of our marhumin, rahimahullah, man qara'a Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. Bismillah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المذلومين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مظلوم يا أتشان كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم ولمن من لجأ إليكم سادتي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إنا بلوناهم كما بلونا أصحاب الجنة إذ أقسموا ليصرمنها مسبحين ولا يستثنون فطاف عليها طائف من ربك وهم نائمون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Numerous times throughout the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands the human being to enter into a state of reflection and contemplation of the whole Quran. He states, for instance, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do you not contemplate the Quran? Do you not reflect upon the Quran? Is there a lock on your heart that is preventing you from reflecting, contemplating upon these words? Like we know, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so integral to our religious identity and is a means to allow for us to grow spiritually in a wide variety of facets. A portion of the Quran is dedicated to speaking about the life beyond this one. A portion of the whole Quran offers us insight with regards to how we manage relationships in our family. A portion of the Quran offers us insight in regards to the wisdom behind our law and jurisprudence within our tradition. And a portion of the Quran also speaks to a wide variety of different stories and anecdotes, which we're going to talk about this evening, inshallah. And the idea is that when we take a look at these stories and when we take a look at these anecdotes, it's not such that we read a story for the sake of being entertained, or that we read these verses that talk about paradise or punishment such that we become inspired solely, but that we contemplate upon its words. Why does God speak to this reality as opposed to a different reality? We submit to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-wise. And someone who is wise is not going to state things in vain, but rather they're going to be careful and diligent and precise with what type of language that they're using in the midst of any conversation, let alone al-Hakimul Alim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then presents to us this book, this Holy Quran, and we know that these members of the family of the Messenger of God, who we come to mourn and grieve during the course of these nights, they are known as Warithul Quran. They are the inheritors of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we recite in one of the ziyarat of Imam al-Hussein, Assalamu alayka ya warith kitabillah. In the same way that they're inheritor of the previous prophets, Adam and Noah and Ibrahim and Musa and Isa and Rasulullah, in addition to, he is the one who holds up the value of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus it's important for us then to hold steadfast, to read, to reflect, to contemplate upon the Holy Quran and spend time with it. And I know it's something that we all know, and I also know that it's something that is incredibly difficult and challenging for so many people. Why? Perhaps because of the way that we were taught the Quran, perhaps because of the way that we perceive the Quran to be. For many people, the Holy Quran is seemingly this really mysterious book that's difficult to read in its Arabic language and more difficult to understand in its Shakespearean translation. But at the end of the day, the Holy Quran is not meant to be a book that has all of these barriers, meaning that God numerous times throughout it, as well as ahadith and traditions of the Messenger and his family, peace and blessings be upon them, emphasize the importance of anyone and everyone being able to take benefit from it. It's up to us. Like anything else in life, it comes with a challenge. And that requires a sense of commitment. I'm not good at math, nor am I good at science. That's why I studied religion. And at the same time, every day when I walk into a math class, a science class, in high school, in college, I know that I have to put in that much more effort because at the end of the day, I want to get the ultimate result. But because my only result is physical or tangible, I'm going to do what I have to do to get the grade so I can leave the class. But the Quran is a book of guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offers to us to remove us from ignorance into knowledge, from doubt into certainty, from darkness into light. So why wouldn't we put a commitment into it that requires all of our being and all of our focus and all of our diligence? In the beginning, it's difficult, like anything else. I don't like to eat healthy. I rather eat cheesecake and donuts every day. But at the end of the day, I know that that's not good for my body, and I need to put forth a commitment if I want to live a healthy lifestyle. I don't like to exercise, but I have to exercise. And once you take those small steps, you realize that the latter part of the journey is that much easier. The beginning is difficult. When it comes toward balancing the understanding of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's super important. No matter where you are, no matter what gender you are, no matter what age you are, no matter what culture you come from, we have to understand that we have to start somewhere. And there's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not only in reading the Quran in terms of its Arabic language, but in addition to that, to spend time to read it in its translation and to think about it and to contemplate. And once you take those small steps, if it's 3, 4, 5, 10 verses a day, 2, 3 minutes a day that we're putting forth toward contemplating, toward reflecting, toward meditating upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we're going to find is that God will support us too. You put that little bit of effort, we'll start to uncover, but at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us and assist us in this journey to get closer to His book. All it takes is the way that we change our approach, like we talked about last night. If we change our approach and we tell ourselves that God cares about me and you, all of a sudden my relationship with God will be more positive. Once we know that the Quran was revealed to me, for my own benefit, because God cares about me and He gives me this manual of life, then all of a sudden I say, why wouldn't I want to look at it, even if it means just 2 or 3 minutes of my day? Anyhow, for today's discussion, inshaAllah ta'ala, I want to reflect upon the earliest, according to many mufassireen, stories that is mentioned within the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Qalam. And I want to reflect upon this particular anecdote in 3 different dimensions. The first dimension is to ask the question of how exactly we are meant to understand the whole Quran in the first place. The second dimension is to understand and contemplate upon the reason why God reveals stories within the whole Quran. And thirdly, and finally, we'll take a look at these ayat of the whole Quran, which are mentioned in Surah Al-Qalam, which refer to the people of the garden, or Ahlul or Ashab al-Jannah, as God mentions in Surah Al-Qalam. So let's jump right into the first dimension. Do we truly have the ability to actualize and understand the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you go to Muslim theologians from the very early days until today, there is so much debate with regards to whether or not the human being can truly understand and grasp the meaning of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many of this also resonates in the way that religion and Islam has been taught to us from a very young age. The first opinion suggests that anyone and everyone has the ability to interpret and understand the whole Quran. What's the evidence? The evidence is a verse of the whole Quran which God says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. And surely we have made this Quran easy, so which one of you are going to take benefit from it? And the assumption is that my ability to know and to perceive the truths within the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are identical to the truths that were revealed to the Messenger of God Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But the question is, if this was the case, and I can understand every single depth of the reality of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then why did God need to send down prophets? And why did he need to send down messengers? You know, one of the biggest problems, at least in my estimation, of the way that most people in the world understand the religion of Islam is they have completely removed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the centrality of this tradition. Many people, they see the Prophet of God literally as the messenger of God, like the messenger who brings you your mail and puts it in your mailbox. With all due respect to them, they don't know what's that package that's being delivered to your home, nor do they know what's in that envelope that they're placing in your mailbox. And there is this perception amongst many, I don't think it's within the school of Ahlul Bayt, but there is this perception that the Prophet of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger. His job is to deliver a message, the contents of which he might know, he might not know. But in reality, like we know, the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, he is the message, and he is the most perfect manifestation of the message. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited to go and give a talk in Washington, D.C. at a predominantly Sunni community, asking me to give a lecture on the biography of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And after giving my talk for 45 minutes, we opened up for question and answer session. And one sister, very politely and respectfully, she raised her hand. And I called on her. And she said that for the last 45 minutes, you told us about the grandson of the Messenger of God, and I learned a lot, and I appreciate it. But why is it so important to you and people within your community that you focus so much on the Prophet and his family, and you have absolutely no care or concern for the whole Quran? She didn't mean it disrespectfully, I don't think. I think that she generally meant it to be curious. And then she said that I believe that if I'm going to spend 45 minutes on my Saturday afternoon, instead of coming to this talk, I should have dedicated it toward recitation and reflection of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For me, politely, I had to respond. And truly, it's a valid question. That's many people that ask the same, even from within our community. Many people ask. They say, we talk so much about Ahl, but what about Quran? Number one, what does the Quran command us to? The Quran commands us to action. The Quran commands us toward responsibility. Amongst those responsibilities is to appreciate and adore and love and to not remove the Prophet and his family from this book. Do we neglect the whole Quran? Maybe we do. Maybe many of us do. Maybe in our communities we do, and we need to think about that for sure. But at the same time, you can't remove one to the detriment of the other and neither can you assume that I'm going to appreciate one more so than the other. In other words, I had to explain to this young lady, as well as many in the audience who were from Ahl Sunnah as well, who stated, wait a minute. Your understanding is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed this book as your means to get to God. And that the Prophet and his family are just this, important family, no doubt, but they're on the margins when it comes to taking us from, in terms of transmitting us into guidance. That's not the truth. The reality is such that the Quran is a means to an end. And Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam are a means to the end. And as the Messenger of God, he states that if you hold steadfast to these two things, that you will never go astray. Inni tarik fikum ath-thaqalayn, right? That I've left behind for you these two things. So once you marry them, and once you connect them, and once you glue them together, we're able to find success in this world and the next, because again, they allow for us to know, they allow for us to see, they allow for us to perceive, they allow for us to reach that state of perfection that we're seeking. So the first sort of perception, or the first idea, or the first opinion when it comes toward if we can understand the Quran in totality is yes, that we can understand everything. But at the end of the day, we recognize that there's a prophet and that there are representatives. And through their support, we're able to get to a greater depth when it comes toward the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma salli. The second opinion suggests that no. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the only ones who can truly understand the whole of Quran are the Prophet and those who he exposed that knowledge to, and that's from Ahlul Bayt or from amongst the awliya or so on and so forth. And I think that this is a perception, or this is an opinion that is awfully sort of conflated in many of our communities. Why? Because you recite the Quran, or we're scared to recite the Quran because people are scared to interpret it incorrectly. So they say, I'm going to read the Quran, I'll take the blessing from looking at it, I'll take the blessing from listening to it in the car, I'll take the blessing from getting the reward by reciting the entire thing in the month of Ramadan, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, I have the right to reserve any sort of benefit that I'm attaining from these ayat and verses of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the only thing that I'm going to do if I want to study the Quran is see what Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam had to say about this verse or that verse or this verse or that verse. But then what does this do? This limits the ultimate text of revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to humankind. Yes, no doubt that in the depth of depths, Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, the Messenger of God, they know the realities of this book. And that brings me then to the third opinion, where we have numerous hadith from Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam that tell us, for instance, that the Quran has 70 levels to it. And that these levels and depths that we're able to perceive and see and understand are on the level or in sort of relation to our piety and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more that we see God, the more that we see a depth in the Quran. I'll share with you a couple of hadith from the family of the Prophet alayhi salam. A first hadith from Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi. He states, Kitab Allah Azza wa Jal ala arba'ati ashya. He says that the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on 4 levels. Ala al-ibarati wal-isharati wal-lataifi wal-haqa'iq. He says that the first level is that which is on the apparent. The second level is when the believer can see symbols. The third level is a depth, and the fourth level is absolute truth. And then he states, فَالْإِبَارَةِ لِلْأَوَامِ. That first apparent level of the whole Quran, anyone and everyone can benefit from it. And according to Ibn Abbas in a hadith, he states that everyone who knows the Arabic language can benefit from the fact that the Quran was revealed in the Arabic language. On a second level, everyone who is ignorant, if they were to read and contemplate even in their own language, they can benefit from it. A third level is someone who has some sense of knowledge. When God talks about the sun and the moon and the rotating of night and today, someone whose profession is in understanding these realities, they can understand that with a greater detail. And fourthly, for instance, that only God and those who we've exposed His knowledge to can understand. So going back to the hadith of the Imam Sallallahu Alaihi, the first level, فَالْإِبَارَةِ لِلْأَوَامِ, is that knowledge which anyone and everyone can perceive. وَالْإِشَارَةِ لِلْخَوَاسِ. And the second level are these symbols that are mentioned within the Holy Quran, that is sort of, if you know, you know. Once you get to a higher depth of understanding, you read it so often, you start to understand patterns within the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاللَّطَائِفِ لِلْأَوْلِيَاءِ. And then there's a third depth, which is only exposed for the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me just say this really, really quickly in parenthesis. Many people, whenever we read a hadith or we hear from the majlis, we talk about the awliya of Allah. Everyone assumes that the awliya of Allah are Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. No. They are the greatest of the awliya of Allah, as well as the prophets and the messengers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But every single one of us have the potential to reach the station of the awliya of Allah. There are levels. We're not going to reach, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, or Imam al-Baqir, or Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. No. But we have the potential to reach that state, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون, as God states about the awliya, that for them they grieve nothing nor they fear anything. For the hadith, it states that the third state, وَاللَّطَائِفِ لِلْأَوْلِيَا, that there's a depth of the Quran that is reserved for the awliya, وَالْحَقَائِقِ لِلْأَنْبِيَا. And the absolute truth is with the prophets and with the messengers and ultimately with our messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, and Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. So again, based on our relationship with God, on our understanding of this book, on our dedication, on our devotion, our certainty, we have the ability to see more. The more that we put in is the more that we're going to get out. And that brings me then to the second dimension. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala numerous times throughout His book mentions stories and mentions anecdotes. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refer to so many stories and anecdotes within the Holy Quran? There are three different reasons why. The first reason is, why not? Who doesn't love a good story? Who doesn't love a good anecdote? No matter how old you are, everyone loves a story. Everyone loves a good anecdote, particularly those with a wide variety of different lessons. We like to watch a movie because it entertains us and there's a story to it. We like to read a book because there's a compelling story to it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the nature of the human being. We are connected with personalities in anecdotes and in stories so often. We're watching a movie and we see ourselves resembling a character within that show, within that movie. Why? Because it touches our emotion differently than if we were to, for instance, just be told data or just be told facts. That's the reality of the human being. And as the hadith of the messenger states, تَكَلَّمَ النَّاسَ عَلَىٰ قَدَرَ أُقُولِهِمْ. Speak to people in accordance with their level of intellect. So give them that which they're able to understand, and which they're able to perceive. From a young age, we tell our kids stories in order that they get the message. We give them Aesop's fables. Why? We hear them from a very young age. Why? Because there's a moral at the end of the anecdote, and there's something for us to learn in the midst of these stories. Take a look at Karbala. The best of stories is the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Why is it so beneficial? We tell the same story every single year, dozens of times in the midst of the year. We know every aspect of it from beginning to end and all of the details in between. We learn this and we teach it to our children. The first words that they say when they come out of the womb is Ya Hussein. We raise them in the majlis of Imam al-Hussein. Why? Because the story links with their heart, with their soul, and it meshes with them in such a way that they're always connected to it. And what a story it is. You can relate to anyone and everyone within the story. You hear the story of Hur al-Riyahi, and everyone is so moved by it because we see ourselves in Hur al-Riyahi. We hear the story of Habib ibn Madahir, and you see yourself in Habib. You hear the story of Zuhair al-Balqain, who was in opposition to Imam al-Hussein at one point in his life, and you wonder at your own fate and your own destiny. One by one, these personalities, these individuals, from amongst the men and from amongst the women, from amongst the elders and from amongst the children, we are able to be exposed to so much in the midst of this really rich story. So when it comes toward those anecdotes which God mentions within the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us a story because the human being loves stories. Secondly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents anecdotes to us within the Holy Quran in order to console the Prophet of God sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When the Prophet would go through the hardship and difficulty that he was enduring in the holy city of Mecca in the early part of his mission, he was told about that which was transpiring to Nuh and to Ibrahim and Musa and Isa. And it offered him a sense of validation to know that his predecessors, they experienced the same difficulty and hardship that he did. Sometimes when someone comes to you, someone comes to us with difficulty, they're talking to us about their problem. It helps them when we explain to them similar experiences that we had, right? I had to experience grief, for instance. You remind them of that moment when you had to experience grief and how you dealt with it. We love that. Our children come to us, family members come to us, our friends come to us, our spouse comes to us, and we share our reflections and our experiences with them in order to validate their experiences. That's the nature of the human being. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma salli. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to console him. And I want you to think about that for just a moment. We just talked about how people divorce the Prophet of God from the mission. A portion of the Quran is dedicated to consoling Rasulullah. How great is the Messenger of God? Our intellects truly don't have the capacity to perceive. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So a second reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions these anecdotes and these stories within the Holy Quran is to tell the Prophet of God and his community that, look, they were prophets and they were communities who had to experience that same thing which you had to experience, and when they were patient, see what happened to them. So for instance, God presents the entirety of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. As the Prophet alayhi salam is going through turmoil and difficulty in Mecca, as well as those of his closest followers and the early Muslims, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't worry. One day Yusuf was thrown into a well, and then Yusuf was thrown into a prison, and Yusuf was abused and treated so horrifically, but there was a day when Yusuf alayhi salam owned a portion of the universe under his authority. And there's going to be a day, O Rasulullah, and O Muslim community, where you will stand in victory. And when they entered into the holy city of Medina, and when the Messenger of God established what he established in the holy city of Medina, that story of Yusuf and trust in God and patience and tawakkul and all of that became a reality which they were able to relate to. And that brings me then to the third reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents stories, because stories tell amazing lessons. Not only do they connect with us on this emotional level, not only are they a means to console the Messenger of God or offer an insight when it comes toward our history, but in addition to that, most stories, again, they have wisdom within them. And that brings me then to this anecdote that I want to share with you all as a self-reflection, as a reflection for all of us from chapter 68 of the Holy Quran. In Surah Al-Qalam. So if those of you who would like to follow again through these ayat that I wanted to share with you all this evening, chapter 68 of the Holy Quran, beginning with verse number 17. We'll try to be quick, inshallah. What's the context of this anecdote? Again, chapter 68, verse 17. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to a group of people. He doesn't tell us their names, doesn't tell us where they live, doesn't tell us many details, but he calls them Ashab al-Jannah, the people of the garden. And like I said before, that according to many mufassirin of the Holy Quran, this was the first story, the first anecdote that was revealed in the Holy Quran to the Prophet alayhi salam. Our ahadith tell us, for instance, that give us some bit of background with regards to this group of people, is that there was this elderly man, this father who had 5 children, and some hadith tell us that it took place in Yemen, some say that it took place in Ethiopia. Doesn't matter at the end of the day. This is all sort of additional insight, but at the end of the day, the lesson is that which is most important. That he has 5 children. And he had a really wealthy garden farm that he was able to take these crops and sell them and make a lot of money. But he insisted to his children in his last will that the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided so much for their family is because a portion of these crops would be distributed to the poor. And he writes in his last will to his 5 sons, he says that when I die, this garden is yours, and inshallah it will do very well, and you'll be able to profit from it, you'll be able to benefit from it, all of you work together, but one condition, make sure that you give a portion of these crops to the poor, and you will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase you in your rizq. This is the context. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins in chapter 17 by explaining what happened to these 5 children. In verse number 17, he states, إِنَّ بَلَوْنَاهُمْ كَمَا بَلَوْنَا أَصْحَابَ الْجَنَّةِ إِذْ أَقْسَمُوا لَيَسْرِمُنَّهَا مُصْبِحِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, surely we tried them, surely we tried you, O people of Mecca, in the same way that we tried the people of the garden when they committed to removing all of their crops and keeping them for themselves. What happens? The people of Mecca, in the early years, after treating the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the way that they did, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, had to endure a famine and had to go through a lot of poverty in those early years. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying the reason why, in this verse, that you are going through this poverty in your city, this famine, this drought, is because of the way that you treated my Prophet. And then he says, and let me show you the way that I've tried those who have not done the right thing from those who have come before you. After this father passed away, these 5 sons, they take a look at their farm and they saw the weather, a lot of rain was coming down, and they started to do really, really well. So at the beginning of the harvest season, the beginning of spring that particular year, they all gathered amongst themselves. They had a hangout, and they said, hey, this year we're doing really, really well. We can profit off of this and build an empire from the money that we're going to make. So for this 1 year, only for this 1 year, let us not distribute anything to the poor, but after this year we'll make the intention to give even more. They all look at each other, and they all say, okay, fine, let's do it. But only for this year. They had guilt. They had a guilt within them, because our father said this. But they said, no, but the opportunity over here outweighs what our father told us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, إِذْ أَقْسَمُوا لَيَسْرِمُنَّهَا مُصْبِحِينَ, that they made this commitment that one morning we are going to come and we are going to gather all of the crops before the poor who have been coming to our father for decades see that we have all these fruits and vegetables to distribute to them. We're going to pick them all beforehand. وَلَا يَسْتَثْنُونَ, God says in verse number 18, and let's make sure to get every single fruit and every single vegetable and make a commitment to one another that if we see anyone walking in the streets putting out their hands, we cannot give one of them, because then others will come. If you go to certain parts of the world, like we know, you give a little bit of money to a beggar, and all of a sudden, because of the intensity of the poverty, you're going to be surrounded by so many. They were concerned about the same thing. فَطَافَ عَلَيْهَا طَائِفٌ مِّن رَبِّكَ وَهُمْ نَائِمُونَ. Verse number 19. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so they all gathered together, these 5 brothers. And that night, they made that commitment that they're going to wake up early in the morning, gather together all of their fruits and vegetables, and eradicate it entirely to make sure that none from these beggars, from the poor, come to their farm. That night, they went to sleep. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَطَافَ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّهُمْ, that night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala paid them a visit. Meaning that the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came. But God mentions in detail, فَهُمْ نَائِمُونَ, that they were sleeping. They were sleeping and God did something. Why does God mention such detail and precision when it comes to the fact that they were, why couldn't He just say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for instance, eradicated their farm? He says that God visited them, or the command of God came to them when they were sleeping to remind us that before we go to sleep, be thankful of God's blessings. Make one dua, recite some verses of the Holy Quran. Even if it means you're on your pillow, say, oh Allah, thank you for giving me another day. Give me another day for tomorrow. Forgive my sins, oh Allah. Something small to remind ourselves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before we sleep. And the same thing when it comes in the morning. You wake up, open up your eyes. Alhamdulillah, oh Allah, you're giving me another day. That's it, it's sufficient. And taking small steps toward building from there. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues. فطاف عليها طائف من ربك وهم نائمون فأصبحت كالصريم. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command came, and every single one of those plants, every single one of those trees, every single one of those fruits and vegetables had been eradicated entirely. It had become entirely barren out of the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they had made this intention again to not give and to not distribute. فَتَنَادَوْا مُصْبِحِينَ, but they're still at home, right? They don't know that this happened, they were sleeping. فَتَنَادَوْا مُصْبِحِينَ. In the morning came, God says, in verse number 21, they woke up in the morning and they started to wake each other up. They saw that the sun had come out. They started gathering, come on, quickly, quickly, let's go. Let's go to the farm, we need to pick all these fruits and vegetables before all of these guys, they come. They started calling to one another. فَتَنَادَوْا مُصْبِحِينَ. They rush out of the house as fast as possible. أَنِغْدُوا عَلَى حَرْثِكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَارِمِينَ. Let us get there as fast as we can so that we can pull out of these crops and gather them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us some insight. He states, أَنِغْدُوا عَلَى حَرْثِكُمْ, which demonstrates that they woke up after dawn, meaning that they woke up a little bit late. And some of our ahadith and some commentators of the Quran state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala probably stated this with such detail that they woke up a little bit late. Why? Because when you're thinking about something so much at night, it messes up your sleep, right? Am I right? You have something really, really important in the morning. How can you go to sleep without some, medication? It's hard. You're thinking about it the entire night. My kids just started school. Before the first day of school, they came to our bed 100 times. Oh, I can't sleep. Why can't you sleep? I'm nervous. I'm not feeling good. I don't want to go to school. This, that. Why? You're thinking about it consistently. You have a big job interview, big doctor's appointment. Something is going on the next day. It's hard for you to sleep. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this insight. Because they went to sleep without contentment, because they went to sleep nervous, that they might have been doing something wrong, that they were unable to sleep properly. So they overslept past their alarm, so to say. أَنِغْدُوا عَلَى حَرْثِكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَارِمِينَ. So quickly, let us rush, let us get out as fast as we possibly can. فَانْطَلَقُوا وَهُمْ يَتَخَافَتُونَ. And as they were getting out, they were whispering to one another, let's go and get all these crops as fast as we can. Why does God mention it, that they were whispering to one another? يَتَخَافَتُونَ. Sometimes when children, they're doing something bad, in the opposite room, parents, they know because their kids are really, really quiet. Even we do it all the time. You want to talk poorly about your boss, right? You can do it really, really quietly to your colleagues. Why? Because you don't want them to hear. Over here, they were whispering to one another, today's going to be that day where we're going to carry all this cash. We're going to be making so much money. It's the beginning of our financial empire, so to say. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, فَانْتَلَقُوا وَهُمْ يَتَخَافَتُونَ أَنْ لَا يَدْخُلَنَّ الْيَوْمَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِسْكِينٌ. That today is going to be that day where we're not going to allow for one of those poor people to come to us. Let me say something in parenthesis over here. We have hadith from Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam that tell us that when someone comes to you and asks us for anything, be it financial help and support, or be it, advice, or is looking for someone to talk to, then we should enter into a state of gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're not the one asking. Some of our ulama, they would, when someone comes to them and asks them for money, for instance, they would take their hand, put it in their pocket, and take out their wealth, and instead of putting it on top of their hand to humble themselves, they would open up their hand with the money and let the beggar pick it. One day, there was a student in the seminar who asked his teacher, he says, why do you put out your hand like this and don't just give it to him? He says, because I don't want to feel the power and authority to give. I rather someone places their hand over my hand. It's an honor. It's a privilege that we have the ability to serve. Which is why a hadith, they tell us that when we give and when we put wealth in someone else's hand, it's like us shaking the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And hadith tell us that before we give, of course not in front of someone, that we should kiss our hand, because that hand is about to touch the hand of Allah, of course metaphorically. Over here, we should take a look at it as an opportunity. Someone comes to help, someone comes for support, we look out for those opportunities to help and support. I know it's difficult, I know it's challenging. It doesn't mean you have to commit to giving everything, but something. And including to not turn away others. You're walking in the train station, you don't have any money, you don't have anything to give them. At the very least, say something nice. God bless you, I'm so sorry. Hopefully you get something soon. Say something. Don't just ignore them, they're human beings. And this is the etiquette of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam. So they would whisper amongst themselves, they're discussing amongst themselves as they're rushing toward this farm, and la yadkhulanna al-yawma alaykum miskin, that today no one is going to enter into our land and grab any of our crops. وَغَضَوْا عَلَى حَرْدٍ قَادِرِينَ. And it states, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse number 25, that they walked with a sense of pride and confidence to doing something bad, really. But I want to again pose another question, my friends. Did they really do anything wrong up until this point? They hadn't actually done anything. They hadn't actually taken the fruits or vegetables yet. They just intended to do it. A lot of times people say that if I make an intention, it's not a big deal, because I'm not going to really do it. Over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to demonstrate to us, yes, that might be true. But at the end of the day, the intention has the opportunity to impact you metaphysically and spiritually in so many a different way. So close the door to commit an act of transgression or sin immediately, and intend to do good at every opportunity. Before you go to sleep, intend to wake up to perform Salatul Fajr. Even if you made an intention, there's no way I want to pray for Salatul Fajr. Intend it and see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do for you. You make an intention that, oh, if you were to give me the opportunity to build 1,000 schools and 1,000 orphanages, I will do it. Just make the intention, what's the problem? You might never get the millions so that you're able to do it, but if you make the intention, maybe you'll get it. Maybe make commitments to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and God will facilitate, but on the flip side, be careful of the negative intentions that we set. وَغَدَوْا عَلَى حَرْدٍ قَادِرِينَ فَلَمَّا رَأَوْهَا قَالُوا إِنَّا لَضَالُّونَ. And finally, they approach this farm and they see it. It's all barren. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed it in its entirety. So they begin to call out to one another, إِنَّا لَضَالُّونَ. We're lost. This can't be our farm. We went to the wrong place. But God is precise. Inna la-dhal. Dhal also means misguided. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a play on words here. One of the meanings could be that they were saying to one another that we're lost. This can't be our right farm. This can't be the farm that our father inherited for us. The other meaning could be that no, we've gone astray. We did something wrong. We intended something, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done what He's done. Bal nahnu mahrumun. Surely we are the ones who have lost out. And in a hadith from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, he states, surely when a man commits a sin, فَيُدْرَأُ أَنْهُ الرَّزَقُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take away from his sustenance. Which is why we say in dua, oh Allah, forgive those sins that stunt our sustenance, to be careful. He continues, subhanahu wa ta'ala, قَالَ أَوْسَطُهُمْ أَلَمْ أَقُلْ لَكُمْ لَوْلَا تُسَبِّحُونَ. It's the most important verse. I know I'm running out, but very, very quickly. It says, the middle from amongst them, from these 5 children, he says, didn't I tell you that we should be in a state of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And according to our Mufassiri, it doesn't say that's actually the middle one. There's 5 and he was the third. But it was actually the youngest one of them, but the most level-headed from them. So didn't I tell you that we should have been thankful to God? What happens? They start arguing amongst one another. Like people normally do. قال أوسطهم ألم أقل لكم لولا تسبحون قالوا سبحان ربنا إنا كنا ظالمين. Surely we are those who are the wrongdoers. فأقبل بعضهم على بعض يتلاومون. And they started arguing with one another. No, you didn't tell us that. You should have told us for real. They started pushing blame. It was your fault. It was your fault. It was your fault. Because why? The human being doesn't like to take responsibility. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demonstrates this to us. You know, after the day of Ashura, the people of Kufa, they went to Shimr bin al-Jawshan. They said, Shimr, you killed the grandson of the messenger of God. What's wrong with you? He said, I didn't do it. He said, what do you mean? He said, I didn't do it. Umar bin Sa'ad told me to do it. They went to Umar bin Sa'ad. They said, Umar bin Sa'ad, why did you tell Shimr to do it? He said, I didn't do it. Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad told me to do it. They went to Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, why did you kill Hussein? I didn't do it. Yazid told me to do it. They go to Yazid. Yazid, why did you kill Hussein? I didn't do it. Shuray al-Qadi, he was the justice, he was the judge. He told me that it was permissible for me to do it. We always love to put off responsibility. Over here we see this. But over here they also realized their mistake. What was their mistake? They weren't in a state of gratitude and thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Look, we always want more. Like we said last night, the only thing that changes as we get older is how big our du'as become. When we're young, we want milk, we want sleep, we want to use the bathroom. When we get older, we want toys, we want chocolate, we want candy. When we get older, we want to get a part-time job at the supermarket so that we can buy video games. When we get older, we want to buy fancy sneakers. When we get older, we want to go to college. When we get older, we want to get married. When we get older, we want a car. And then the only thing that changes is how nice the car is, how big the house is, how much more nicer, fancier things that we get. At the end of the day, we're the same human being that loves physical, tangible things. When are we going to be content? I'm not saying that we shouldn't want more. I'm not saying that we shouldn't get better in anything and in everything that we seek in this world. But at the end of the day, there has to be some part of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whereby we show gratitude for what it is that we have. And God wants to give us more. Once we show gratitude and thankfulness to Allah Azza wa Jal, He will increase us. That's the reality. قالوا يا ويلنا إنا كنا طاغين. At this moment, they realized, they said, oh Allah, we're sinners. We're sorry. We made a mistake. عسى ربنا أن يبدلنا خيرا منها إنا إلى ربنا راغبون. Maybe one day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will return this back to us and give it to us even better. And surely to Him we return. And finally God states, in verse number 33, كَذَلِكَ الْعَذَابُ وَلَعَذَابُ الْآخِرَةِ أَكْبَرُ لَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ. That surely this was a punishment from Allah, but the punishment from Allah in the world beyond this one is greater. And according to some ahadith, that these 5 sons who committed this act, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them through trial and tribulation and poverty for close to 20 years before He finally returned them their farm, and they prospered from thereafter. From this one act. It's so important for us to be careful and vigilant and mindful of our deeds and our actions, to understand our privileges, our ability to serve others, and materialize from there and build and grow in that capacity. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. According to some of our ahadith and historical reports, this night, the night of the 7th of the month of Safar, is the night of the martyrdom of Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Mujtabah, alayhi salatu wassalam. And it is stated that Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, numerous times, he attempts to take the life of Imam al-Hassan. And according to some reports, perhaps 3 times the Imam salamullah alayhi was poisoned. And the 3rd time, which led to the eventual martyrdom, according to reports, it is stated that Muawiyah, he purchased a poison from Rome to inflict the body of the Imam salamullah alayhi, and truly the pain and the intensity and the damage that it did to the body of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam is narrated in our historical records, which again speak to what challenge and difficulty that the Imam had to endure and encounter on a night like this one. It is stated that as that poison began to inflict the body of Imam al-Hassan salamullah alayhi, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam comes toward him. And it is stated that the Imam alayhi salam is vomiting due to the intensity of the pain that he's enduring and the weakening of his body. And Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is in a state of grief. He begins to cry. At this moment, Imam al-Hassan says, oh, Abu Abdullah, why are you crying? He says, oh my brother Aba Muhammad, I look at you, I see your situation, I'm concerned about you. At this moment, Imam al-Hasan, he says, oh my brother Aba Abdullah, be patient. For I see that image of 30,000 people surrounding you on the 10th of Muharram, as our grandfather has foretold, all ready to shed your blood in the name of our grandfather Muhammad. And then at this moment he says, La yawm ka yawmik ya Aba Abdullah. There is no day like your day, O Aba Abdullah. And the Imam alayhi salam is in such pain. He continuously is vomiting. You know what happens? According to some reports, it is said that Imam al-Hasan, he tells Aba Abdullah, he says, oh Hussein, this pail that I'm vomiting in, remove it from the scene, remove it from my room, cover it and place it somewhere else. At this moment he says, why, oh my brother Aba Muhammad? He says, because I'm afraid that if Zainab alayhi salam, she walks into this room, that she's going to weep, she's going to grieve, she's going to be worried about me. But I ask you, oh Aba Muhammad, do you know what Zainab had to see on the 10th of Muharram? She had to see Shimr bin Dhil Jawshan sitting on the chest of Aba Abdullah, and she had to hear cries of children calling out, our thirst, oh our aunt. It is said that in the last moments of the life of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, he was lying down on his bed and he begins to utter his final words. He begins to call out his last tashahhud. Aba Abdullah is on his right side, Lady Zainab is on his left side. He begins to call out, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika lah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. He begins to take his last breaths and his soul begins to leave his body. And all of those from Ahlul Bayt, they begin to weep and they begin to grieve around Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And like many of you know, that Imam al-Hussein tries to take the body of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, of Imam al-Hasan, and he tries to take it and bury it next to the grave of Rasulullah. But the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, they even went to the extent as to take their archers and pierce through the body of Imam al-Hasan after he died. It is said that one moment Imam al-Hasan, he was taken back by Imam al-Hussein because of the arrows that pierced through the body of Imam al-Hasan. He had to redo the kafan. He takes a look at the body of his brother Imam al-Hasan in that state. But I ask you, O Aba Abdullah, on the 10th of Muharram, you were sitting on that horse. You were taking a breath for one moment as 30,000 archers were around you at that moment. It is said that one man, he takes a boulder and he throws it at the forehead of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. According to report, it is said that when Imam al-Hussein falls down from the horse, his body didn't hit the ground because the number of arrows that pierced through his body. All while Zainab alayhi salam was watching, that, oh Imam al-Hussein, you were able to perform the ghusl and the kafan on your brother Hassan. But what happened to you? They left you alone 3 days on the plains of Karbala without any ghusl, without any kafan.
على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. مات حسين يا حسين يا
Hussein.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. Hayya ala khairil amal, hayya ala, hayya ala, hayya. जब मुझे आपके कातिल ने है मारा बाबा, जब मुझे आपके कातिल ने है मारा बाबा, जब मुझे आपके कातिल ने है मारा बाबा, جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہر کماچے پہ سکی گانے ہر کماچے پہ سکی گانے پکارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا مجھ سے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے مجھے بالوں سے پکڑ کر ہے تماچے مارے میں نے سر شیم سے مانگا جو تمہارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا آپ کے سینے پہ آرام سے سونے والی آپ کے سینے پہ آرام سے سونے والی سو کے اب خاک پہ کرتی ہے گزارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا فوج گرے آپ نے کوفے میں مجھے باچے تھے فوج گرے آپ نے کوفے میں مجھے باچے تھے اس کو بے گردی سے ظالم نے اکارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا روکیں گے جہاں پہ اسے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے روکیں گے جہاں پہ اسے دیکھوں تو دیکھوں کیسے تیرا اصغر تھا مجھے جہاں سے بھی پیارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا ساک رہباروں کے گورایا گیا ہے مجھ کو ساک رہباروں کے گورایا گیا ہے مجھ کو چور زخموں سے بگن ہے ماں سے بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا جب مجھے آپ کے قاتل نے ہے مارا بابا ہر کماچے پہ سکی گانے ہر کماچے پہ سکی گانے پکارا بابا جب مجھے یا حسین
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حیا علی خیر العمل حیا علی خیر العمل ہائے ہائے زینب ہائے ہائے شام ہائے ہائے زینب زینب ہائے ہائے شام ہائے ہائے زینب ہائے ہائے شام
ہائے زینب ہائے ہائے شام
حیا علی خیر العمل حیا علی خیر العمل حیا علی خیر العمل یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصوم یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو ہائے پابند نہ ہوا ہے ہائے پابند نہ ہوا ہے رونے پہ نہ پہرا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو تی جس کو نیند آتی شبیر کے سینے پر تی جس کو نیند آتی شبیر کے سینے پر ہائے زندہ در زندہ ہائے زندہ در زندہ اس کے لیے قضا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ
زندہ میں تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں تنہا ہو
ٹکرائے نہ وہ کیوں کر زندہ کی دیواروں سے ٹکرائے نہ وہ کیوں کر زندہ کی دیواروں سے بھائی سے اور پھوپھی سے ہے بھائی سے اور پھوپھی سے جس کو جدا کیا ہو یا رب کوئی ماں
رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں تنہا ہو
زندانوں سے آتی تھی آواز سے سکنے کی زندانوں سے آتی تھی آواز سے سکنے کی جیسے کہ سکینہ کو ہے جیسے کہ سکینہ کو ہر زندان رو رہا ہو رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا ہو ہائے پابند نہ ہوا ہے ہائے پابند نہ ہوا ہے رونے پہ نہ پہرا ہو یا رب کوئی معصومہ زندہ میں نہ تنہا
اس وقت جب کہ زینب دربار میں گئی تھی قاری نمازیوں سے محفل سجی ہوئی تھی ظالم یہ پوچھتا غازی تیرا کہاں ہے تقدیر کے ستائے تیرے در پہ سر جھکائے اشکوں کی التجا ہم غازی تجھے سنائے بیمار سالبا کے زخموں کا واسطہ ہے جتنے بھی خستہ دل ہے مولا شفا وہ پائے عباس 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 دل کی مراد غازی تیرے علم سے پائیں روتی ہوئی جو مائیں تیرے علم پہ آئیں زہرا کے درد پہلو کا دیتی ہے واسطہ فضا کی کنیزی میں ان کا بھی نام آئے عباس 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 تیرے علم کو تھامے ہر شخص کہہ رہا ہے مظلوم کربلا کا زینب کا واسطہ ہے پردیسی کوئی ایسا پردیس میں نہ اجڑے صدقے میں اس کی جس کا ہر بار لٹ گیا ہے عباس 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 شام غریب جس کا کرتا بھی جل گیا ہے کانوں سے بالیاں بھی ہائے شمر لے گیا ہے اس بے کسی سے مولا بچی کوئی نہ ترسے فرش عذاب پہ رو کر ہر دل یہ کہہ رہا ہے عباس 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 یا حسین
لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم مہندی ارمانوں کے ہاتھوں میں لگا کر مانے مہندی ارمانوں کے ہاتھوں میں لگا کر مانے صحرا ماتھے پہ ہے صحرا ماتھے پہ سجایا تو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے ہائے قاسم نہ تیرے ٹکڑے بدن کے ہوتے رو کے سینے سے ہے رو کے سینے سے لگایا تو حسن یاد آئے لاشا قاسم کا نظر آیا یاد آئے لاشا لاش قاسم کا اس گھڑی روئے بہت اس گھڑی روئے بہت شہ کو حسن یاد آئے لاش آیا حسن یاد آئے لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور عبا میں ڈالے ٹکڑے قاسم کے چنے اور عبا میں ڈالے باندھ کر لاشا ہے باندھ کر لاشا اٹھا یا تو حسن یاد آئے لاش قاسم کا حسن یاد آئے لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن فیضی شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے فیضی شبیر جو قاسم کا جنازہ لائے زخمی تیروں کے ہے زخمی تیروں کے جنازے میں حسن یاد آئے لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے لاش قاسم کا نظر آیا حسن یاد آئے اس گھڑی روئے بہت اس گھڑی روئے بہت شہ کو حسن یاد آئے یا حسین
صلی اللہ علیہ یا رسول اللہ السلام علیکہ یا حبیب اللہ السلام علیکہ یا نبی اللہ السلام علیکہ یا امین اللہ السلام علیکہ یا خاتم النبیین والمرسلین السلام علیکہ یا ابا الحسن علی ابن ابی طالب امیر المومنین السلام علیکہ یا فاطمۃ الزہراء سیدۃ نساء العالمین السلام علیکہ یا ابا محمد الحسن ابن علی السلام علیکہ یا ابن السلام علیکہ یا ابا عبداللہ الحسین یا ابن امیر المومنین السلام علیکم ائمۃ المسلمین علی ابن الحسین ومحمد ابن علی وجعفر ابن محمد وموسى ابن جعفر وعلي ابن موسى ومحمد ابن علي وعلي ابن محمد والحسن ابن علي والحجة القائم المهدي السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا مظهر الإيمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
نعرہ